Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Manager VMware, Tom Gillis.
Good afternoon. Thanks all for coming. My name is Tom Gillis. I am the General Manager for Networking and Security here at VMware. I'm new to VMware, about 6 months, but not new to the industry. I spent about 5 years running the security products group at Cisco. I've done a number of security and infrastructure-related startups. And I'm excited to be at VMware because as I look at where the industry's at, I think VMware is uniquely positioned to be the company that can deliver that consistent set of infrastructure across what looks like a increasingly heterogeneous and complicated set of computing cloud and computing resources in your enterprise. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about NSX and our networking technology and where we're going, where we are, and as well as the directions that we're heading. But before I get into that, I want to take a step back and I want to reflect a little bit on complexity. So complexity is a bad thing, right? Complexity is a dirty word. Well, I'll actually argue that complexity is a byproduct of success. And that each of you out there are dealing with IT infrastructures that are pretty complicated. But the reason they're complicated is because the business that those infrastructures power have been successful. And so it's our job as IT professionals to harness that complexity and still deliver the efficiency that the business needs. And I certainly have my own personal example of this type of complexity growing up with the business. So one of the startups that I was involved in was called Ironport, and we built a spam filter. One of our engineers had an idea that said, hey, you know, every time we get an email from the spam filter, if we could check a database up in the cloud and just say, what do we know about the sender? That might be kind of a cool idea. And so we had a data center down in the basement of our building, and we literally just kind of racked up a couple servers and some storage boxes and hooked this thing up. Turns out this was the world's first reputation system, and it took off. Absolutely took off. So we had, you know, over the course of 7 years, 40,000 customers. We were filtering something like a third of the world's email traffic. And that data center down in the basement in our office in San Bruno, it grew and it grew and it grew. We kept adding boxes with little blinky lights and big giant storage things and writing these purchase orders for multi-million dollars. There's Ethernet cables going all over the place. And so we created an awful lot of complexity. Complexity that was a result of scale. We added new services. The new services didn't really talk to each other. And so after 7 years, you know, we took a step back and be like, what happened? Well, what happened was the business succeeded. And so it's our job as IT professionals to find a way to create efficiency on top of all that complexity. And the answer lies in virtualization. So what does virtualization do? The physical hardware doesn't go away. This is very important to understand. When we talk about virtual networking, you still need electrons have to move from point A to point B. But that big, giant, complicated stuff with routers and switches and all different types of heterogeneous infrastructure, different types of servers, different types of clouds, public clouds, private clouds, hybrid clouds, branch computing, all of that stuff, if you sort of blur your eyes a little bit and think, it's really the goal of all this stuff is in service of a very simple idea, which is the web tier needs to talk to the app tier, needs to talk to the database tier, and nothing else. So that policy is one word of English language, but that could easily translate into 5,000 firewall rules. And I used to run the firewall business at Cisco, and so I can tell you there are many customers that would push us for 500,000 firewall rules, 600,000 firewall rules. Those are not unreasonable numbers, but it is completely unreasonable to try to manage an infrastructure that complicated. With virtualization, we can restore the simplicity because we have an inherent understanding of what the application is. So because we are the hypervisor, we know what a web server is, we know what the app server is, we know what the database is, we move them around, and therefore we can implement that policy extremely efficiently at the virtualization layer. And this is at the heart of what we talk about at VMware. You heard Pat talk about it this morning, the virtual cloud network. The idea is abstracting all the complexity and providing a single layer of infrastructure that can connect from the branch to the core to the cloud. And these are the products that make up our virtual cloud network solution. So we have NSX data centers, probably the one you know the most. We've extended that to public clouds with NSX Cloud. We've added the ability to migrate workload with NSX Hybrid Connect to move seamlessly across these clouds. We've extended into the branch with our NSX SD-WAN by Velo. And that's actually a very interesting product. We're going to be talking more about that. And we've added unique security capabilities into the hypervisor itself with AppDefense, all of which I'm going to show you demos of here today. So we've made a huge amount of progress since we first launched this vision of the virtual cloud network and software-defined networking some time ago. This year we announced that we've shipped 80 million virtual switchboards. Let me put that in perspective. The entire networking industry last year shipped 79 million switchboards. Now ours are virtual, but we're talking about very, very large scale switching deployments. We shipped 1 million firewalls. Now our firewalls don't have a cool bezel and a little blinky light. It's little software firewalls, but it's the most widely deployed firewall in the world built into the vSphere environment. We have more than 7,500 customers that have adopted NSX in our virtual networking. 82% of the Fortune 100 have chosen NSX. We're 10 times larger than our nearest competitor in software networking, and we're really pleased to announce that the SD-WAN business has more than doubled year on year. In fact, Gartner just released their Magic Quadrant for the SD-WAN space, and you can see it's a crowded field, but up and to the right is our VMware SD-WAN product by VeloCloud. And so we're going to be seeing a demo of that product and hearing from some customers later, but this is something that if it's at all of interest to you, I encourage you to check it out. It's a very strong product, and the value proposition is so clear. Better, faster, cheaper, right? And putting that abstraction on top of a complex network of connections, servers, infrastructure, so we can simplify your overall network design at the same time, deliver better end user experience, and save you a bunch of money. So, recent announcements that we made in August was, continued drive of NSX everywhere. We've integrated NSX into containers, and we introduced a new integration called adaptive microsegmentation, where we're using the power of the hypervisor and our AppDefense technology to understand the application topology and automatically generate dynamic firewall rules. We're actually going to show a demo of it live. It's really powerful stuff. It's new, it's young, but I think it's really exciting and something that's worth following up and talking more about. So there are 3 pillars to the virtual cloud network. The first is it's an end-to-end fabric, right? This idea of going from branch to core to cloud. It's all defined in software, and it has intrinsic security. And when we say intrinsic security, it doesn't just mean regular security that's built in. That's something that's relatively easy to do. We're focusing on security that we can uniquely implement because of our architectural position in the stack. The things that we can do with a hypervisor that are very difficult to do with an agent or other types of approaches to security bolting on an appliance. And so we're going to show you in more detail some of what we can do with this intrinsic security, but it's very, very powerful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the end-to-end connectivity. When I meet with customers like you and we walk through the data center, a lot of times it feels like a trip to the Computer History Museum. Anybody know what this system is? It's a VAX 11780. Anybody actually use a VAX 11780? I'm glad to see some other hands up there, so I'm not the oldest guy in the room. But yeah, I used to use one of these things when I was an engineer back at Raytheon. We've got mainframes that are still running in production today. We've got client-server architectures that were built in the 90s that are still running in production today. We've got private cloud infrastructure that is running probably the bulk of your applications today. We've got public cloud infrastructure, which is sort of new and upcoming, but clearly becoming increasingly relevant in your environment. And we've got microservices architectures, right? So each one of these different types of computing infrastructures needs to be considered when we think about modern applications. So you can see the hipster that's holding the phone and holding a mobile app. Let's explore what that app might entail. That app might involve an iOS client that's talking to a microservices-based backend that's running natively on Amazon. And that's great, but when the user goes to click deposit, what happens? Well, that application needs to reach back into the infrastructure and traverse the entire Computer History Museum because the client records are running on a client server machine or a virtual private cloud, and the actual ledger, the thing that's keeping track of your bank balances, may well be running on an IBM mainframe. And so what we need is a single layer of infrastructure that can provide consistent policy enforcement from legacy workloads to modern workloads to new emerging workloads in one consistent fashion. And get back to that simplicity of the web tier can talk to the app tier, can talk to the database, but nothing else. Because that's what we're trying to do. And this is really our unique capability and our opportunity at VMware is to deliver that end-to-end connectivity. So the idea we had is let's put it at NSX everywhere. In July, actually in August in Las Vegas, we made a couple of announcements. In that journey of NSX everywhere, we announced a partnership with Arista. We're pushing policies from NSX into Arista physical switches. We announced integration into pretty much every major form of Kubernetes. We announced the acquisition of VeloCloud for bringing NSX out to the branch. And we announced the ability of NSX to run natively in AWS, EC2, or Azure public clouds. And so what we're pleased to announce at the show today is we have a similar partnership with IBM. And what I like about this partnership with IBM is that IBM is very philosophically aligned with VMware in that they have the same breadth of offering. So IBM can do things with physical workloads. We can do things together for containers. We can do things for the branch. We can do things for public clouds. And so I'm lucky today to have Fayaz Chaparwala, who's the general manager for IBM Cloud, who's going to come up and talk a little bit about what we can do together. Fayaz? Thanks very much. Why don't we sit down? So Fayaz and I overlapped at Cisco. You have a new gig, new logo.
So like you have been here for 7 quarters now.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're 6 months, but I'm 7 quarters.
7 quarters, yeah. So he's still a newbie. But tell us about your role at IBM. What are you doing?
So my responsibility is running the IBM Cloud platform. So in all of the cloud services that we have.
And of course, in that capacity, I think the thing that's probably on a lot of people's minds here is, how do we make the journey to the cloud? What happens there?
Yeah, so look, our focus, and very symbiotic, right? And we've been on this journey together for 2 years now. But it's really about, it's enterprise out. And as you heard this morning, only about 20% of the workloads have made it to the cloud, right? So we still have a long way to go. And for us, it's about taking or helping our customers on the journey from the enterprise out to the cloud in a hybrid fashion. And customers, this journey is going to take many shapes. So either the customers are going to want to modernize their workloads on-prem and then connect into cloud, or they'll want to migrate all their workloads into cloud and then connect into cloud services. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Or they will just start fresh and what we call cloud native. And most customers are going to have, depending on their workloads, are going to be leveraging all of these journey maps. So for us, it's really helping customers on this hybrid journey to cloud.
Yeah, we make it sound simple, but it's actually pretty complicated, right? You're dealing with large infrastructures. It's that complexity we talked about earlier. As we make our journey together to try to make this easier for customers to digest, what's the news that we announced today?
Well, we announced a couple of things, but just building on what we announced last year. Remember with NSX, and so we had this on-prem to cloud. We announced HCX. It's renamed now, but to allow customers to seamlessly migrate from on-prem into cloud. And now, today we announced 2 things. One is what we call IBM Cloud Private. And the whole idea behind IBM Cloud Private is it's our private cloud service. It's container-based. It's now running on VMware. So the beauty of that is that now it allows customers to leverage containers and VMs side by side, because customers want to use both of these vehicles and run them on the cloud. And then, of course, the important thing underneath that is the connectivity. So the second piece of this announcement was leveraging NSXT.
Yes.
How do we consistently connect all of the services so that customers can, whether they're in the containers, whether they're on VMs, they can leverage their security policies very consistently across a single pane of glass.
Yep.
So whether you take a web tier in the example that you were showing, and you may decide that you want to, containerize that and move that into cloud, you can still connect that and manage it with the same security policies with NSXT.
Yeah.
So it's really about...
And the devil's in the details here, right? Like, these things are hard to do, and we've had literally hundreds of engineers working with the IBM team to make this stuff seamless and easy for the customer. However, there's still challenges with consuming this. So where the services come into how a customer can journey to the cloud?
Yeah. So look, I think at the end of the day, we provide all of this as a cloud service, and the intent is that customers can, provision this yourselves and manage it yourselves. But the customers sometimes want help. They may want to use this as a managed service. So 2 things we announced there. We announced a mission critical service this morning, so we can run VMware and kind of 4 nines availability as a managed service for customers that need that. And then we are also announcing today through our Global Services Organization, or GTS, advisory service for NSXT. So we have a fairly large constituent of experts in GTS on VMware and now NSXT that can help customers on this journey.
Yeah, I was meeting with some customers today. I think I saw them actually in the room. What I find is interesting is that everybody's trying to solve the same problems. But, give or take, right? You all have unique circumstances, but we're all looking at these same issues of how do we get to the cloud. And I do think there's a lot of advantage in working with a VMware and an IBM in that we have the experience of been there, done that, right? Like we've made every mistake along the way, trust me, and we can help you benefit from those learnings. And when we migrate to the cloud, it's a time to consider best practices and time to consider doing things differently. And so, thinking about services as well as product, I think, is really, really important in this journey.
Yeah, and look, we have 1,700+ customers now that have been with us on this journey. Yeah. The eventual goal, of course, is they all want to use all the cloud service, whether it's Watson or blockchain.
That doesn't happen by accident,
or
right?
AI, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And we have a lot of joint experience now doing this over the last 2 years, and then building lots of tools and products to help them, migrate customers on their journey.
Well, we're lucky to have one of those customers that has made it on the journey join us here today. So please welcome Stefano Ferenzi. Please come up and join us, Stefano.
Thank you.
Welcome, Stefano.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stefano, why don't you sit in the middle and we'll double team.
Stefano, thanks for coming here.
Pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about, Arvind touched on it in the morning, but tell us a little bit about CNH and your focus at CNH.
Yeah. So CNH Industrial is a company in the capital good business. We are quoted on the New York Stock Exchange and on the Milan Stock Exchange. Just to give you some figures, it's a company with last year $28 billion revenue. 66 plants, so 60,000 employees. So it's a sizable organization. We are known for delivering and producing agriculture equipment, transportation, commercial transportation equipment, engines, and power generators. And the most known, let's say, brands are Case International Harvester, New Holland, Iveco, FPT Industrial. This is, and let's say, which are our top priorities. Our top priorities are to deliver new services to augment our products. This is our, priority certainly number one. Second priority is to continue to have a better engagement with our customer and dealers. And the third priority is to transform our key business processes leveraging new technology, like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and blockchain.
Mark Andreessen always says every company is a software company, and yours is a perfect example, right? They make tractors and heavy equipment, but it's the services piece that I think is really interesting.
It's for us, for example, precision farming and telematics are very important services that we provide to our customers.
Yeah. So what was the business objective as you thought about the journey to the cloud? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yes. First of all, we need to understand that this is, you mentioned complexity and success. This is a company that has grown through merger and acquisition. Yeah. So we have, let's say, to use a nice word, a complex and really articulated infrastructure. So the challenge number one is for us to deliver service fast at a lower cost. So this dilemma with speed and lower cost.
Yes.
And to do so, what we decided is that the answer to this was to start a progressive, and I stress the word progressive, journey to the public and private cloud.
So now, clearly, we have an IBM VMware relationship. So why did you pick us to help you on this?
Yes. Well, first of all, we tested, and several vendors. But in 2016, we have done an exercise and a study, that where we embrace this progressive journey toward cloud. Why we decided IBM? Well, first of all, is we have a 20-year partnerships, so successful partnership. So you know us very well, you know our process, you know our complex infrastructure. and you are helping us to get the most out of our existing application. So this is for sure an important and two important reasons. The third, and equally important, is we are a global company. You have global coverage, so we can access and you can provide access to data center in the 4 regions and in different countries.
And yeah, you guys have a pretty big global scale.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
and how many countries is that?
180, kind of.
100. So it's a pretty big footprint.
Yes.
Trust is a really interesting topic because I always tell customers the one thing I can guarantee is that something's going to go wrong. Right? When you're dealing with this kind of complexity and migrating these workloads and it's all live and running and customers are expecting it works every single time all the time, that doesn't happen. And I think in the spirit of a partnership is that I think VMware and IBM, we share this, like we're going to stand by our customers no matter what. Right? And we're going to make this stuff work, and we're going to make it work at scale. And that's not always easy to do, but we very much appreciate the trust that you've put in us and given us the opportunity to try to help you transform your business and sort of embrace all of the software and agility that is going to really transform the whole industry.
We have an important shop with skill with VMware in-house. So of course, and the fact that it is easy for us to move it application from to the cloud, at the very end we'll end up to have IT as a service.
That's right.
The vision.
That's the vision.
Right.
Yeah, and we're on that journey. Thanks you gentlemen both very much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Stefano?
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank
Okay.
you. Thanks, Tom.
Get you on the back. Thanks much. So we talked about the 3 pillars of the virtual cloud network. End-to-end connectivity. It's all defined in software. And then we'll get to the security piece. So software, right? We talked about software with Stefano. I think software is revolutionary. One of the things, as we get to know each other, you'll start to learn about me. I love stories and I love analogies. So when I was a kid, I used to work full-time, not full-time, I used to work summers and during the winter shoveling snow, summers cutting grass to make money. And I wanted to buy a turntable. And if you remember turntable design in the 1970s, the more high-end it was, the more knobs it would have, right? And so some of these turntables, they had strobe lights and they had servos and you could turn all these knobs. What for? To make it sound good. What was really interesting is there was one company, Bang & Olufsen, European company, that had a completely different approach. They took this absolutely minimalist but very beautiful design and they built a turntable that had one button, play. And the tone arm would automatically go to the edge. That little second arm there was to detect where is the edge of the record and then drop right on the beginning of the record and it'd play and the sound quality was beautiful. So I bought one of these things. I still have this in my living room. It still works, which is pretty amazing. I don't want to tell you how old it is because I'm dating myself. But the point is there's that analogy, the beauty of simplicity and elegance of a one button experience has relevance in my modern adult experience, and I think in the things that you guys are thinking about right now. When I was at Cisco, I ran the firewall business, and I was very proud of the fact that the Cisco firewall, I would argue at the time, was the most versatile, and I think probably still is, the most versatile networking device out there. You could configure this thing to do anything. And maybe there's the paradox right there, because when Amazon first launched the public cloud, it had a built-in firewall, and that firewall had one button, on, turn it on. So my guys came to me, they're like, Tom, this thing's a joke. Like no one's going to use a firewall that just has an on button. Well, it turns out the joke was on us because lots of people use that firewall. Why do they use that firewall? Because it's easy. And this is really what we want to deliver. We want to be able to deliver an experience to developers where they can just launch their application. They have an idea at 2 o'clock in the morning, they just go ahead and do it, and they don't have to think about, is this open to the internet, not open to the internet, basic security functionality, basic policy enforcement we talked about, web server, app server, database. Those things should be built into the software, and it should just work. And so with NSX, we've integrated this into every major flavor of Kubernetes, including native Kubernetes, Red Hat OpenShift, 2 different offerings from Pivotal, and what we announced at the show is integrating with IBM's container service. So we're trying to bring NSX everywhere into VMs and containers so that we can deliver on that one-click experience. Because consider the alternative, right? A developer says, I need to make I open a firewall rule. I make a change request that goes through inter-office mail to someone who does policy formulation, that then goes to the security review, and finally the configuration gets pushed. It is not uncommon, and I see heads nodding, that can take 45 days or more. And so with our software automation, we can take a process that used to be 45 days and we can turn it into 0.45 seconds, the amount of time it takes you to click a button and say, go. And that's the future of the data center, folks. It's going to be automated, it's going to be automatic, it's going to be agile and flexible, and it's going to be defined in software. And so to demonstrate the ability of end-to-end networking when it's defined in software across a complex infrastructure, I'm pleased to have Sanjay Upal come up and join us. Sanjay, please. Sanjay is the general manager for VeloCloud. Sanjay is the general manager for VeloCloud and is going to show us how we stitch all this together.
Okay, hello everyone. Strap on, it's demo time. So what I'm going to show you is how all of VMware's networking products can help a company. This company is known as Cords. It's a fictitious company, and they're in the business of selling cords. Any type of cords, bungee cords, parachute cords, telephone cords, Ethernet cords, all except one type of cord. So what Cord started off with is a brick and mortar store, and then they decided to add, because business was doing really well, they decided to add an e-commerce front end, which is what you see here in terms of the web page. The first issue that we're trying to solve is how do you get this e-commerce front end to connect with the back end, which is still running on physical systems. In fact, what's shown over here is 2 physical systems. There's a mainframe, there's a database, and what we can do using NSX is we can program bare metal switches that are connecting up to these physical backends, and that all can be done in a virtual way. So there are VMs that you can see in the backend tier that connect up to the mainframe that's sitting back in the database tier. Okay, the next thing that this business is trying to do now is to now move the front end and add containers. Now, as you know, developers love containers because that really creates much more services in terms of the front end. And we're going to see how these containers also now can work seamlessly using the same set of NSX products. So first thing I'm going to do is show you the screen that shows the rules. We're going to click on the firewall rules, and we're going to see that in the firewall rules, so this is all using NSX, we can see seamless connectivity. There's an allow rule that gets the application to talk to the database. So this is the application that's sitting on a VM to talk to the database, and there's another set of rules that are sitting right below that, all of course done in software, abstracted out as Tom was talking about. Now next, what we're going to see is that in the router, when you click it, there's a collection of these rules that have been set up. This is a virtual router, as you can see. It's a logical router. All the tiering has been done. The collection of security work groups and the virtual networks all put together in one screen. Now here comes the exciting part, because this is what developers like. This is the setting up of the containers and how container networking is going to work. So as all you developers in the audience know, you love your Kubernetes, you love the CLI that it deals with. The first thing we're going to do is look at the namespace. So this is the namespace that you get in Kubernetes, and now we're going to do a cat of the YAML file. Now the YAML file contains all the descriptions, because this is how the Kubernetes objects are set up. This is the services that you provide and the matchup that you do in terms of the declaration and what the service wants in terms of these objects. So what we have done from an NSX standpoint is insert app labels into this YAML file. And when we do the rest of the cat of the YAML file, at the end, you will see that the objects that we've tried to set up have been described and created. So we'll go to the end of this YAML file. I know this is going a bit fast, but we'll get to the end and we'll see that the app labels have been inserted and the different types of Kubernetes objects have been created over here. Then we just go and watch what's happening as it is deployed, and you can see that the service is running. So there's a Kubernetes service that has come up and now it's running. Now let's go back and see how NSX has been able to plumb this all the way from a container back into a VM sitting in 2 different tiers. So we go back and look at the NSX screen. There's a new router that has been set up over here. You can see all the other logical routers over there as well. And now we're going to get in there and do a trace. So here's the rest of the firewall rules. We're going to trace what's on the left-hand side, which is a container defined by a logical port, and we're going to trace it to the right-hand side to a VM. This happens to be a MySQL VM. So we choose the logical port for the container. We choose what's happening on the VM side. You see the networking descriptions, and we hit the trace button. Now what's really cool about this is you can follow everything that's happening from the container through the virtual switching and routing all the way into the VM on the other side, this would have been a really difficult thing to do because typically these are managed in 2 different domains, but this is all brought together from networking. And if there's something wrong going on, you can use this trace tool to figure out where the breakage is because all the virtual switching and routing paths along the way from that container to that VM have been described. Next thing that CoreSquad is going to do now is they're going to set up a public cloud front end because, of course, business is doing exceedingly well. And so we're going to move some of that front end into the public cloud. So we go back into our cloud service manager, we click on clouds, and we see that there's been VNets that have been set up in Azure and the VPCs that have been set up in AWS. Now let's click on the Azure ones, and we can see how NSX has been able to describe the interconnection of the VNets that are sitting in Azure. So we can bring this together along with the IBM ones as well. So these are the instances that you can see in Azure, and what's really cool about this, which you'll see in the next screen, is we go back to the instances themselves in the inventory, and you can see the on-prem workloads, you can see the AWS workloads. Had there been any IBM workloads, you can see the AWS and Azure workloads all in one screen. So this is again provided to you from a virtual standpoint, using software. Now, CoreSquads, of course, put this front end from a public cloud perspective, and business is booming, and so CoreSquads has decided now to open some physical infrastructure. This is putting out branch offices out there so that they can transact business close to where the customers are. They already had a few offices set up by now, but they're going to open a brand new office, and this office is going to be in the San Francisco office. So we're going to go now to how they're going to set up their branch office networking using VeloCloud. So the first thing you do, go to the VeloCloud screen, and you see that there's been a few branch offices already set up, and we're going to add one more branch office. So what you do here is very simple. You get out there and you provision a new edge. Now an edge is a device. You can either get hardware or software. In this case, it's a hardware device. And you provision this edge. You choose the type of edge that you want, and then you simply click the button. And what happens from there on is an edge is physically transported to the site, to the San Francisco site, and a non-IT person gets a hold of this edge, gets to their email, clicks on the link that comes up, and then provisions the edge. And the really cool thing here, this is the activation email that gets sent out. When they get that edge and when they click on the link, the edge wakes up, it gets its most recent download from the cloud, and it's up and running. So this is getting an entire branch office network up and running in the matter of a few minutes. So this is how you'll see that the latest software has been downloaded from VeloCloud, and now you have an up and running branch office network. Now let's see how this branch office network is working and how the networking is working, the wide area networking is working for that particular office. So what this screen shows is that from that office there are two connections, two physical connections. There's a Bay connection and a Rome business connection. Okay, and what you can see here is that each of those connections can be described by the bandwidth, packet loss, jitter, and latency on both of those connections. This is something that you can do across all your branch offices, and this is what CoreSquads is doing to manage the networking across their network all the way from the branch offices back into their data centers. Now, what we're going to try and do is the branch office person is going to see if they can have a kiosk application, a video application. How good is this network to run video all the way into their branch office? Now, you can see on the bottom part of this screen, those two networks, the Bay network and the Rome network, that they're not really working very well. The red and yellow mean that the network actually has some issues, some jitter issues, probably packet latency issues. But the network on top, which is the overlay network that VeloCloud builds, is looking much better because we have these proprietary algorithms where we can steer the traffic between one of those two connections. So the jitter, packet loss, and latency from an overlay standpoint are doing well. So the manager of that branch office feels, yes, indeed, they can run a kiosk application using video from that office because they have the ability to combine those two physical networks into one virtual network. So now what we're going to see is on the left-hand side, we're going to see how that virtual application, how the kiosk application would run if it was not using SD-WAN, and the right-hand side if it was run using SD-WAN. So this is an application where the person in the branch is trying to sell, as you can guess, a parachute cord. Now, if you were buying a parachute and you looked at the left-hand side, you probably were not going to buy that parachute cord because you can barely see what's happening with that poor person. But on the right-hand side, things are working, really well, and they probably will sell a few hundred parachute cords out of this experience. So this comes with this we come to kind of the end of this demo. So what we've been able to see is that a brick and mortar store expands out, adds additional tiers, adds container networking, puts the public cloud in place, expands to their branch offices, a lot of new stuff coming to light for this business, but all tied together, brought together by our virtual networking. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tom.
Round of applause for Sanjay. Thank you much. I love that demo because he showed you in 10 minutes what would have taken me months if I was trying to do that with individual piece parts, right? And it's that simplicity of web server, app server, database, spanning legacy workloads, modern workloads, cloud workloads, going out to the branch. All that stuff can be pulled together and delivered in software. So the last thing we're going to talk about is security. And when we talk about security, like I said, we don't want to think about security that can be done in other ways. We want to think about security that can be done uniquely with our architectural position in the stack. And I think the hypervisor is a very, very special place for doing security because it sees all of the basic building blocks of an application and a data center. It looks at how the application is using compute, it looks at how the application is using the network, and it looks at how the application is using data. But it does this without an agent. And so there's two big issues with using an agent for security. The first is agents are just complicated. They're hard to manage, they're difficult to deploy, they don't always play nice with other agents, and you can sometimes forget them. But the second issue is that once an attacker gets root, root can't stop root, meaning the agent becomes powerless, and in fact the OS itself can't protect itself. And so there are basic things that happen in an operating system. For example, binary files on a production server should never be modified, ever, period. It's almost like common sense, right? The operating system will mark those as read-only, but when an attacker gets root, they can just overwrite the files, embed themselves in, and this is how an attacker can maintain persistence in your network for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And so leveraging the power of the hypervisor, we are like super root, right? So even if an attacker gets root on one of your servers, we are watching and looking for, I call it the list of things that should never change and the list of things that should never happen. And it's almost like common sense, right? I think web servers don't magically spawn root shells. Binary files that are executable in production shouldn't be written to. And we can enforce those rules and therefore increase the integrity, the runtime integrity of your system. So we've instrumented that into ESX with an offering that we call vSphere Platinum. We announced that in August. It's shipping and available now. Very, very exciting because it's so easy to deploy. But we look at these workloads on an individual server. We also look at your entire fleet of servers, and then we look across our entire population of enterprise workloads. And there's really nobody that sees more enterprise workloads than VMware. And so we start to build up patterns using machine learning of here's how Apache behaves, here's how Nginx behaves, here's how a database behaves. And so we can continue to refine that list of things that should never happen and the list of things that should never change. Now, you know I like analogies, right? So I wasn't allowed to actually use a Star Wars image, so this is not a Star Wars image, but imagine a guy just like Han Solo, right? Han Solo is kind of like an unprotected Linux server, right? Really hard to pin that guy down. Like he's always like, oh, Jabba, I'll get you the money tomorrow, and I meant to have it for you, don't worry, I'm gonna be there. The only time you really knew where he stood is when he was frozen in carbonite. Then you know exactly where he stood, right? He stood in Jabba's palace. So think about our AppDefense technology as carbonite for your production server. When it's ready to go into production, we're going to lock down the list of things that can actually happen and eliminate a bunch of stuff that should never happen. And that is powerful but simple concept is really revolutionizing security. And so the whole security industry has been sort of chasing what we call the known bad. They use signatures or behavioral techniques, and the fundamental concept is, I've seen this before, or I've seen something kind of like it before, and I'm using machine learning and fuzzy logic, et cetera, to try to approximate things that I know to be bad. And that's an important part of a security solution. We're not suggesting it isn't. But by looking at the known good, you really take, it's a complementary and alternative approach to security. And so taken together, a focus on the known good is moving towards an immutable infrastructure, right? It can't just randomly change. You're going to narrow down the range of possibilities. This is particularly relevant in a container runtime environment. When a container is going, there's no way anybody should ever be patching the OS or the kernel because it's abstracted by the containers. So taken together, the known good and the known bad can reduce your attack surface dramatically. Now, we assume that no matter how good this is, someone somehow is going to find a way to get through. And so in addition to hardening the host itself, we introduced microsegmentation several years back to stop the lateral spread of malware. And the focus of microsegmentation in the first generation was, let's use our knowledge of the traffic that's flowing over the wire with NSX. Let's use our knowledge of the VM to create rules, static rules, that can isolate a workload. What we announced in August, and I think is one of the more interesting technologies we delivered, is a fusion of our AppDefense in ESX with NSX to create adaptive microsegmentation. So we now understand not just the VM, but we understand the application itself. We know, oh, this is the web tier, this is the app tier. We can see how those systems are behaving, ensure their integrity, but we can also automatically generate firewall rules so that you don't have to do that manually. And I've talked to many customers, again, I think I saw a few in the audience here today, that are saying, hey, manually microsegmenting my infrastructure, that's a big task. And it's kind of a scary task because sometimes you get it wrong or things change and then you start breaking things. With adaptive microsegmentation, we make it easy. Right? We automate the process. We can show you the flows. You can then verify these are the policies that I want and deploy them automatically. And if your application changes, the policies will change with them. So very powerful technology. So to show you an example of that live and with a live attack, I'd like to invite Tom Korn, who's the general manager of our AppDefense and security team. Come on up, Tom.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So, should we dive in and give folks...
I think it's a good day for an attack, right? Who wants to be attacked? Tom does, it turns out. Not
that's
me.
what I do.
The other Tom.
Can I steal the clicker?
You may indeed, yes.
All right, well, as Tom said, this is a simple but incredibly profound technology. I've worked in security a long time. I've never had a chance to work on something that I thought really was this profound in security. The notion of saying, leveraging the hypervisor itself to very simply understand what's the purpose of every workload in VM and say that's all it can do. But as part of that really is bringing this notion of being able to map and see the infrastructure through the lens of the application. Now, Tom had asked us, let's bring this to life, and to do so, I think the best way, as Tom said, is to see this through the lens of an actual attack. So here's the scenario we've set up. Sanjay earlier had laid out this chart of the architecture of chords. The security we've implemented on this is endpoint security on each of the VMs and each of the workloads. And we've set up a firewall across the perimeter. And of course, you actually have to open up certain ports on that firewall. Port 80 for web, 443 for secure HTTPS, port 53 has to be open. And that's what allows attackers an avenue in. And so what we did is set up a Kali Linux box, free software used by red teams and hackers. That allowed us to probe through the open ports to understand what software chords had deployed on their app server, and then using something called searchsploit to see what are the known exploits for what was on there, which was Drupal 8.
Hey, Tom, this is not that someone made a mistake, right? This is a well-implemented security architecture.
Yeah.
This is probably what you have running in your data center today, and the attack we're going to show you is something that could be running in your data center today, right?
It's exactly right.
We're living in.
It's exactly right. So based on this, what we did is we set up a reverse TCP connection to the app server. And then essentially at that point, we're sitting on that server. We're effectively owning that, essentially with root. And as Tom was saying earlier, with root access onto that, that's what allowed us to essentially turn off the endpoint security. And this is a really challenging issue with essentially, it's called running security in the same trust domain as the attack surface. At that point, we're really free to do a lot of things. So look, there's a lot of ways to make money on this as an attacker. You can steal data, ransomware. We decided to have some fun with it, and we did something called cryptojacking. We wanted to essentially put crypto miners on the database server. So to hop over there, we dumped all the hashes of the credentials from that app server, and we did something called pass the hash. Many of you have heard of pass the hash attacks. To pass the hash over to the database server, that essentially logged us in. And on there, we just installed a crypto miner on that and started to mine crypto, a Bitcoin on
huge,
servers.
Right?
Yeah. So, as Tom said, this is not bad security set up. This is the challenge of doing security today.
Right.
Yeah. So you want to see how we defend it against
what do we do? Are we dead?
Well, not quite yet.
Hope is not lost.
Could we switch over to the system? All right, so this is the notion of why some of these technologies are very effective across these use cases. So what you're looking here is actually the screen of AppDefense. When you turn on AppDefense or vSphere Platinum or the new vCloud Suite Platinum, essentially what you get is a console that looks like this. The colored chart, the green bar is all the VMs that are in protect mode. Orange are VMs that we now understand and are ready to go. Red is it's still chugging through to understand. And as it chugs through that, it's creating that list on the left of the various applications or regulatory scopes. And this is very simple. We have the e-commerce server. So if you click on the e-commerce server there, what you essentially do is the system is chugging through. You see that app divided into service tiers. This is being automatically done by AppDefense, divided into VMs, and then you're starting to see what's running on those tiers. And if you could, click on the app topology. This is what's magical. You're actually seeing the infrastructure through the lens of the application.
Yeah.
These are your app tier, your database tier, your web tier. And this is doing it because the hypervisor is in a position to be able to see in, and because we can run things like machine learning across millions of VMs, and because we can do things like integrate into the CI/CD pipeline, we can do things like this that map it out. If we click on the app tier, we can see what's running on those. We can see how the app tier communicates, what processes communicate. Not only that, we can actually look at how the machines in those tiers communicate to things that aren't part of that application. Things that might be, if you click up on top, those are the processes that are communicating. But if you click up on top on that machine, here's the thing, even if you microsegment stuff, it's got to connect to domain controllers. It's got to connect to potentially external servers, all kinds of things on it. It completely understands and essentially maps that out and creates manifests or birth certificates for each of these machines.
I just want to put an exclamation point on it. This is the thing I was talking about. Right? So the awareness of understanding not just your application, but the topology, how these pieces fit together, and as it's dynamic and changing, we're watching and managing all of that. It's really, really powerful. Right? This used to be done on a spreadsheet, and it was static, and it was hard and scary.
Yeah.
Right? Now it's automatic.
Now, here's a very cool part, because this is what is. The question is, but is that the way it should be? So if we click back to the application, part of the thing that's really cool is it will go through and validate that this is actually what it should be. And that is really two things. It's about understanding the reputation of each of the processes that are running on that, and it's about validating the behavior of those processes. Should that process be communicating? Should it be launched in that way? And again, we can do this from first principles for off-the-shelf software. We can do this with the CI/CD pipeline, and we can do this on machine learning across millions and billions of machines. And once you know that, you can lock it, essentially. So if you show them just sort of going up and locking it, this click essentially says, I'm going to lock the manifests. Now, we did two things here. One, we're locking the workloads, the compute, and by default it goes into alert mode, meaning it locks the manifest, but it's just going to alert you. But that new button is really the beginnings of the adaptive microsegmentation piece, which is it will take this and it will essentially print your microsegment. It will program the firewalls to create an absolutely perfect microsegment around that application. So if we click that, and can you flip to the firewall? All right, you have to refresh. You essentially have you've just printed your microsegment. And you'll be using AppDefense within security teams, virtualization teams. The vAdmins will now be using AppDefense inside vCenter with vSphere. Essentially, your systems are going to get smarter about your applications, and you'll be in a position to essentially program and create.
I talked to a customer just an hour ago that said, we have 1,000 firewall rules. Somebody wrote, and that person doesn't even work here anymore. They're gone. What do I do with those? And my view is use a tool like this and start over. Right? We have an inherent understanding of the application. We can create a much more accurate, much higher fidelity view of what should happen, and then with a click of a button, generate those rules. That is pretty awesome.
Yeah. So if we go and try to run an attack on a system like this, what I was describing, and you here we're essentially trying to be on that machine. We're trying to disable AV, and then which it does. You'll see how it's alerting on this. but it tries to then install the crypto miner onto the database server, it's not going to be able to move laterally. It can connect in and turn off that first part, but it won't be able to connect because now the microsegment is blocking it, right? And if you go in and take a look at, yeah, so exit out of that. If you can't install crypto miners, find another way to make money. So we essentially launched a strain of Petya because we could. This screen is never good things, only crossing bones. But if you go back to the AppDefense console, here's the thing: the firewall is all set up and it's blocking. AppDefense was set up in alert mode. What you're watching there is the alerts. AppDefense has actually mapped the entire attack and has been alerting. And it says, look, someone is messing, just installed the reverse TCP connection, just turned off the endpoint security. We had it in monitor mode. And the beauty is it doesn't have to be in monitor mode. You can actually put it in lock mode. So if you go back to AppDefense and click up on the policy sets on there, the policy for AppDefense is extraordinarily simple. You're basically saying, what do you want to have happen if it's running is different than what was intended? Right now it's alert, and so we just change it to block and alert. But we created a range of options that some of them use vSphere, some of them use NSX. They could be snapshot, they could be quarantine, they could be insert full packet capture. But once you've pushed that in, that has gone on, that's programmed, and if you go out and try to execute that same attack, nothing will work now. Ransomware won't work now, lateral movement won't work now. It's beautiful in its simplicity of just stopping and trying to chase every attack and instead get rid of the attack surface, which is really, really a simple but very profound piece. So this won't actually run anymore.
Yeah, awesome. Tom, thank you very much. Great to have you.
My pleasure.
Love that demo.
Great to have you. Oh, one last thing. If this is of interest to folks, tomorrow, we've been doing this for a few years. We're actually here at 2 p.m. in this room. We're doing a session with this whole attack completely live with the red team. Yeah. And you'll get a chance to see this in a lot more
detail. Did you bring in some criminals for the attack, or no? Just as simulated?
Yeah, we've been doing this for a few years now. It's
2 p.m. tomorrow in this room, you'll see more in-depth view of this attack. It really is, it's fascinating stuff. So here's the best thing about what I talked about. Every single thing I've showed you, all the stuff we've talked about, new capabilities, it's all available today. You can go download this stuff and talk to your salesperson. The demos that we saw, that stuff is all things that you can go try in your own environment. And we encourage you to do that. We have NSX everywhere, our container networking products, and this new adaptive microsegmentation. So we're very fortunate to have 3 customers with us today to talk a little bit about their experience with the virtual cloud network and with virtualizing their infrastructure. So gentlemen, could you all please come up and join me? Yeah. Thank you. See you. Thank you. Thanks, there we go.
Oh, as you want.
Yeah. So we have Ed Higgs from Rentokil, Danielle Ulrich from Swisscom, and Jean-Marc Voisin from Aligns, and we're actually in a slightly different order, but you'll see as the stories unfold. And we're just going to talk a little bit about virtualization, network infrastructure. Jean-Marc, maybe I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about the business, and then maybe some of your experiences that you've had with VMware and network virtualization.
Yes. So first thing, so Allianz have a lot of agencies everywhere in France, from Paris, everybody knows, but even in Dampierre-sur-Vèbre, nobody knows this town. So 2,500 tied agencies, where we need to have a good performance in terms of network, in terms of resilience, because we have clients in the agencies all the day. And clearly, until beginning of the year, it was not the case. And I had, in fact, 2 dreams last year when we started to work on the virtualization of the network. The first dream is that I think it will never be achieved, having an agent calling me saying, I have no problem with the network. Yeah. So it's a dream.
Yeah, that's what we want to have, right? Yeah.
The second dream, and I'm ready to achieve it, is I have no call. No call. In fact, what we are doing with the help of VMware and VeloCloud, we are building a virtual network in all tied agencies by exactly what was presented before, having many public internet lines connected to the box of VeloCloud, and we have very good performance. We are able to multiply by 4, 5 time response. And in terms of resilience, we have no more issue. No call from agencies saying, I can't make a deal because I don't have network.
Yeah. It's I think one of those interesting things about being in the networking business is that when you do a great job and you do your job right, nobody calls and says, thanks, I got all my packets today. My web pages load perfectly. We have one bad moment, people scream. And so having the ability to virtualize out to the branch and deliver an end user experience that's that good is something that I think we don't see that often, right? That's in the industry. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah. Danielle, you've been focused on the other end of the wire, if you will, lots of work with virtualization in the data center. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing at Swisscom?
Yes, so I'm part of a large DevOps team that was evaluating and setting up the Enterprise Service Cloud for Swisscom. That's an offering based on vXblock, vSphere, vRealize Suite, and NSX of course. And for us, it was a key factor that we could implement micro-segmentation to enforce multi-tenancy. Because we are acting as a service provider, and this was very, very key for our customers.
Yeah.
That they can have a self-service provisioning of security rules.
Yeah. And so I know that you and I have talked. You've had extensive experience with NSX-V, which is the first generation.
Yes.
And the future is about containers and microservices. Tell us what are you thinking?
Now the Enterprise Service Cloud is live for a year, and I could go to the future and check the future developments. I was part of a team that was evaluating PKS on NSXT. And also OpenShift, we have some offerings there. And currently I'm focusing on the hybrid cloud use cases, so with Direct Connect, Express Route to Azure. And yes, I'm very keen to use your new products. So when I'm home, I will download and install and try it out.
Yeah, that's what we want. Now, Ed, you're on both ends of the wire, if you will, data center and at the branch. Tell us a little bit about the business at Rentokil and maybe some of the challenges you've had and what you've done.
So Rentokil Initial is the world's largest pest control and hygiene services company. We operate in 73 countries with about 37,000 staff. And yeah, we've been using NSX in the data center for about 6 months now, but where it's really helped us is we're very acquisitive. We've already heard that from someone else today. We've bought 80 companies since the start of last year. So what's really key for us is that we integrate those companies as soon as possible. Historically, it's taken a long time because we have to ensure the integrity of the services we're moving into the data center. But with NSX, we can put it in its own little bubble and protect all the other workloads. So it's made us much more agile in that respect.
Yeah.
And on the other end, we've been dealing with VeloCloud now for about 3.5 years. We've got 500 sites globally across 34 countries, 5 continents.
Yeah.
And that's really made a difference to us as a business.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking last night. Your company has standardized on Google Hangouts, is that right?
Yes, we've got about 30,000 accounts in G Suite. And outside Google, we're in the kind of top 5 users globally of Hangouts.
Yeah.
And there are some sites, so in Italy, where networking has been historically quite expensive, they actually couldn't use Hangouts.
Yeah.
And we saw the demo earlier about the quality of the video.
Yes.
So the installation, actually the removal of MPLS and the installation of a much cheaper direct internet access solution with a VeloCloud box on the end, and suddenly we can use Hangouts. And the collaboration between Italy and the other countries has increased significantly.
Yeah, this thing is amazing. Like we've given these Velo boxes to our field engineers, and they're running Zoom, WebEx type things with video conferencing and updating slides, and they'll run them across 2 low-cost DSL links and get perfect video, perfect performance. Whereas if you just run on one of the links, it's terrible. Like it's constantly breaking up, it's constantly jittering, and so when you can feel the difference like that. like there's some magic happening. And I think you said your users were like calling like, hey, wow, what happened, right?
Absolutely. And of course, again, Sanjay mentioned it, at a fraction of the cost. So, I mean, we've been able to, in some areas, get up to 500% of the bandwidth with resiliency at 80% of the cost we're paying before.
It's great stuff. So I started with you, Jean-Marc. I'll come back and close with you. You focused on the branch. What's the next problem we're going to take on? What do you think? What's the future?
Not problems, but future.
That's right. Solutions, opportunities. I'm sorry. What's the next opportunity you're going to embraase? Yes.
Opportunities first is to extend the SD-WAN solution to all sites that we have in France.
Yes.
Clearly, for again, question of performance, resilience, and to be honest, to allow all my colleagues to watch France football team without any problems in terms of performance. In 4 years.
Hopefully the team will perform as well as the network. Yes.
And the second opportunity that we have is to go. We launched a project that named Go to the Cloud, meaning the hybrid cloud, where we want again for our tech agencies to have a solution for beginning of next year, and again to have infrastructure as a service. I would like to say, forgot me. It's focus on the business.
Focus on the business. It's a recurring theme, movement to cloud, simplifying your infrastructure, becoming more agile. The tools are available for us to do that. We're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate your time and your support. Okay? So that's the message, right? NSX everywhere, being able to deliver on core to cloud to edge, VMs and containers, and then adding intelligence for adaptive microsegment to make this stuff easier to operationalize. There's a couple of hygiene things I want to point out. We do have a security session in this room tomorrow at 3. We're going to show more details on live attacks, how you can do things like adaptive microsegmentation. We also have workshops and labs that are all listed here. Okay, now before we leave, one of you, are you all familiar with Willy Wonka? You know Willy Wonka, the chocolate? There's a golden ticket. So if you look under your seat, one lucky winner is going to win what do you call these things? Oculus Go headset. Somebody has a ticket under there. There it is. Everyone, thank you for coming. The winner, please come up and we'll get you the headset. But thank you very much. Thanks for your support, and we look forward to talking some more.